So many of the things that you think aren't your choices are your choices. You do have the power to make your life better. You do have the choice to be happier, and you do have the choice to make other people happier.
Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is someone whose work has shaped how millions of people think about happiness, success, and the power of gratitude. Janice Kaplan is a journalist, the former editor-in-chief of Parade magazine, the best-selling author of the Gratitude Diaries, among 17 other books, and she's worked with everyone from presidents to pop culture icons. Her latest book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, is a true masterclass in how we can feel our way into happiness instead of think it. Janice brings warmth, wit, and science-backed insights that will surprise you, empower you, and maybe even shift how you relate to your own body and mind. Let's dive in. Janice, I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here with us today. And you have had such an expansive career, from producing major network television to editing Parade to authoring best-selling books. It's so many wonderful things. So, what's been the common thread or the driving force in your work over the years?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you, so thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I have done lots of different things. I've been a magazine editor and a TV producer, and I've written a lot of books, and I think I just like to tell stories. I like to tell stories in all different ways and to be able to reach people with interesting information, and it used to be when I first started out, and I had kind of a short attention span, so I would go from magazines to television to books, and at some point I thought, gosh, if only I had just stuck with one of them, it would have been better. But then very quickly, all of media, as you know, started to blend together. And so having the ability to do lots of different platforms and find different ways to tell those stories really made a difference. I think I was far enough along in my career at that point that I felt if I have this big a platform, I want to use it for good and I want to use it to say things that matter. And so after I left there, it's when I started writing these more nonfiction books that are more inspirational, because that at that point was, and now is, also what has just inspired me to inspire others.
I love that. And for those who are not familiar with your work, we're definitely going to talk about it because I, for one, love your work and your books. But can you tell us what initially kind of sparked the really deep interest into exploring human happiness and gratitude?
Well, the Gratitude Diaries was a big bestseller that came out, unbelievably now, almost 10 years ago. And I'll admit to you, Casey, it started out almost as a literary device. I had a big fellowship to write about gratitude, and I thought, or to study gratitude. It began with a national survey on gratitude from the John Templeton Foundation. And after I did that, I just started getting interested in the subject. And I thought, oh, maybe it would be kind of fun to spend a year living more gratefully. And since I'm a writer, I think of things in writerly terms. And I thought that'd be a good book to do. And I had no idea how it was going to influence me so profoundly. And so from the very beginning, from the very moment I started taking that on and truly living more gratefully and changing my attitude, I was just stunned by what a difference it was making. And because I'm also a journalist, it wasn't just going to be my own experiences. So I spent the year researching and talking to psychologists and neurologists and Nobel Prize winners and all sorts of people to get as much information as I could. And I think part of the success of that book has been taking things from so many different fields and putting them together to talk about happiness in a slightly different way.
And I got to tell you, the Gratitude Diaries, yes, it was a New York bestseller, and rightfully so. I absolutely loved that book. And, I think it was a defining book for so many people. And I will say that on this podcast, or just core happiness in general, we talk about gratitude a lot. I come from the background of positive psychology, but we talk about just the different ways that it changes our neural pathways in our brain and allows us to start looking for things that are more positive or good in the day, trying to overcome that negativity bias that we can often have as a default in our mind. And I love, love, love the topic of gratitude so much. But I'm curious from your perspective on that book, why do you think that it resonated the way it did with so many people?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your support for it. I think there are a couple of things. One is that it's fun to read. I mean, it's personal and it's fun and it's amusing and I have a lot of research in it, so you have a sense that it is based in something. But on the other hand, I don't quote research studies. I take you along with me as I call up the researchers and explore things together and question it. But I think the other reason that the whole topic of gratitude resonates, and the reason it continues to resonate for me, is that it gives you a sense of control. And I was thinking about that this morning, actually. I was thinking that anytime something goes wrong, we tend to, it's hard. We feel like we're out of control in so many things in this world and so helpless about so many things. And it's so easy to blame circumstances and events and to feel like, I can't do anything." And gratitude, at least in your personal life, at least in the momentary situations you have, gives you that control back, gives you some power back to say, whatever is happening is not going to change me and is not going to change how I see the world. And I'm going to actually be able to take a circumstance, to take a situation and find something good in it and find a way to turn it around and see the good. And I think that's almost a sense of relief to people to say that, yeah, wow, I don't have to be dependent on other people to make me happy. I don't have to wait for the perfect job, the perfect mate, the perfect friend, whatever, the perfect day. I can find something good in every moment, every day. And that's a lovely feeling.
Yeah. And I will say, I know a lot of the pushback that I get when talking about gratitude or trying to implement gratitude practices is that a lot of people will say it's really hard to feel grateful when I am struggling or when I am going through a hard time. But to me, that is the most important time, it seems, that we want to start practicing gratitude or trying to implement gratitude. So, I completely agree with everything you just said, and I'm curious just for those who are listening who are struggling or who have that feeling that it is so hard to be grateful during hard times, how can we find meaning and gratitude? Acknowledging our hard times, yes, but still trying to focus on gratitude. How can we do that? What would you tell these people?
Well, gratitude can't just be for the good times, right? And it's not just about the good stuff. And no matter how bad the day is, no matter how terrible your circumstances, and believe me, when I've toured the country and spoken to people, I've heard horrible stories about health and family tragedies. And the one common ground is that no matter what has happened, you have to get up tomorrow morning. You have to put your feet on the ground.
Mhm.
You have to take one step in front of the other. And you kind of don't have much of a choice about that. And you do have a choice about how you're going to feel about that. You do have a choice about whether you're going to say, I can't do this, this is horrible, or whether you're going to find some small bit of hope, some small bit of brightness. And gratitude doesn't make the bad stuff go away. I think that's what people have to realize also, that it doesn't mean that you're going to be healthier, your kid's going to be happier, your spouse is going to be nicer, whatever the situation may be. But it does mean that you're going to be able to get a better perspective on it. And I think the other point there is that being able to look at things positively also makes you more likely to change things for the better. Nobody who's depressed has ever been able to do anything helpful for themselves. And so if you allow yourself to find the good in it, then you're able to, if you're talking about world events, country events, maybe you're able to go out and be more of an activist to take the steps that you want to change the things. If you're talking about your personal life, your professional life, I think it's the same. If you can see the good, you also have a better perspective on what isn't good and how you want to go out and change that. So I think when you're struggling, understand that your mindset isn't going to change the situation, but it is going to change your life.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I mean, I know with the gratitude diaries, you did this gratitude practice for a full year. And I'm curious, coming out on the other end of it, has your definition of happiness changed or evolved from when you started out to now?
It's a great question. And it leads to the book that I just wrote, What Your Body Knows About Happiness. And what I realized when I wrote the Gratitude Diaries is that you use your mind to change a situation and to turn things around. And I had a situation that I actually start this book with where I was on a vacation. And now I know it's hard to get sympathy for a story told about a vacation, but it was one of those days where, flights are delayed and everything feels wrong. And I was standing in a very small airport and I started, I'm the gratitude lady. I started doing my gratitude practices, to try to find the positive in it. And it worked. It got me out of the airport. And then we were on a boat to our final destination. All of a sudden, the sun was shining, the water was sparkling, and I suddenly felt really calm and I felt really happy. And I didn't have to do any of my gratitude games or any of my gratitude tricks. And I thought, what just happened? And I realized that our environments are very, very powerful and very powerful in changing how we feel. And that I had always thought about happiness as coming from the brain down, because that is how we tend to think about most things. But that in fact, so many of our experiences are coming from our bodies up. And that moment really got me interested in body mind connections and how body mind connections affect happiness. And that's what led to my next round of research and my new way of thinking about happiness.
Oh, yes, and I loved that you said that because I was gonna say one of the things I love about your new book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, is how you challenge those old beliefs. You write about misunderstandings, things like stress, venting, and so I'm I'm curious, what are the biggest myths that you found around mood and movement that science is helping us to unlearn?
Well, I think the first one is just the basic idea of our brain being the great computer that controls everything. And it turns out that it's not. And as one neuroscientist said to me, our brain is just a 3-pound blob sitting inside of a very dark skull. And the only information that it gets is from what it's being fed into it, what's being fed into it from your body, from your senses, from your environment, from all of the experiences that your body is taking in. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's basically looking at all this information that it's getting and thinking, what do I do with this? What happens next? And so, mentioned, for example, stress. Well, we think of stress as being this great negative, that I'm stressed. That's a terrible thing. Well, yes, too much stress can be that way, but turn it around. Stress is your body getting ready for something difficult. Stress is your body being prepared for a challenge. But the problem is when your brain starts to misinterpret that. So let's say you're about to give a speech, you're giving a toast at your best friend's wedding, and you're really anxious about giving that toast, and your heart starts pounding and your hands are sweating. And so you tell yourself you're stressed, and now you're getting more and more anxious. I'm so stressed. I'm going to do a terrible job. Well, if you try to just tell yourself, as many of us would, no, 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 I'm calm, I'm fine, your brain, which is constantly scanning your body, is going, nope, do not believe that. Your chest is pounding, your hands are sweating, you are not calm. But what you can do is take those physical symptoms and think, what else do those stand for? What else gives you that sense? Well, excitement. Excitement also makes your chest pound and your hands sweat. Your brain's going to believe that one. Your brain's going to believe that little slight reorientation. So now you tell yourself, I'm so excited to be giving this toast. I so want to be able to stand up in front of everybody and tell my friend how much I love her, how excited I am for her future. And that little twist in thinking is a way of coordinating body and brain to do what you want it to do. And I find that really fascinating because I think, as I said, what we often do is fight against our bodies. We often say, no, 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 I'm calm, I'm not stressed, I'm okay. And we don't say, well, let's me take what my body is actually feeling and try to use that in a positive way. And I think once you can start to think of your body in that way, it makes a big difference in your happiness and in your ability to move forward.
I love how it's that mindset shift because it is not fighting your body, it is essentially working with your body and then having that true connection. But I do love that mindset shift. And I think another thing you talk about is blowing off steam and how that actually makes us more anxious. And I love how you describe that. It is very similar to the example you gave. But can you tell us, like, what's going on there? When we say to ourselves, like, I just need to blow off steam, what actually is happening that could make our anxiety worse?
Right. Well, so it's classic, right? If you're angry, you just, you go run around or go bang a pillow. And there was even a whole period of psychology, 30 years ago of doing that where people were taking bats and banging things to get rid of their anger and emotions. And there are still these rage rooms. They're all over in big cities where you go in with a bat, a racket, and they have like old crockery and old electronics, and you go in and you bang it and you break it, and it's supposed to make you feel better and release all of your rage and anger. Well, just think about that for a moment, because what you're doing is getting your body more and more riled up. And as your body is getting more and more riled up, your brain, which is, as we said, constantly scanning, is going, "Ooh, I'm angry. Ooh, we're enraged here. Oh, we're upset here." It's certainly not calming things down. And one researcher gave me the example of a teapot. And so, we always think of letting off steam in that classic way of when a teapot and it starts to boil, it pops, right? And you want to let off the steam before it explodes. Well, guess what? We're not teapots. And what you want to do is turn down the temperature. If you want to stick with that metaphor of the teapot, you don't want to turn it so high that it explodes. You want to turn down the temperature. So, what you want is the opposite of a rage room. You want somewhere where you can sit down quietly. You want somewhere where you can relax. You want somewhere where you can just step back and drop that anxiety. And so I think we just have the completely wrong metaphor going on or that sense of letting off steam.
I know, especially with the rage rooms, it's that mentality where I need somewhere for this energy to go, this frustration or anger or whatever it may be. I just need somewhere for this energy to go. So if I can just go and have this outburst of energy, I'll feel better. And what you're saying is we don't think about it from the other perspective, that if we are feeding our body and our movements and our mind with, I'm angry and I'm blowing off steam, that could have an adverse reaction. So that is very interesting. And I'm curious, you mentioned a couple that we need to do the opposite, look for like calm environments. But are there other ways that we can bring that temperature down? I mean, like surprising easy things that people can do.
Actually, one of the simplest things and most important things that seems to happen with body mind connection to happiness is going outdoors. And the connection between happiness and the outdoors is really stunning. And there's been a huge amount of research on that. There was one study out of the UK called the Mappiness Project, which I think is the worst named study I've ever come across, but it's a connection between map and happiness. But the research was actually just as good as the name is bad. And what they did is they studied thousands of people, actually, and they had them wearing GPS watches. So they knew exactly where they were. And they would beep them a couple of times during the day and asking them questions about well being. And what they found was that the number one connection they could find between people's well being was being outside. And being outside just dramatically increased their levels of happiness, their sense of well being. And being in nature seems to have this effect. Other studies have found a huge connection to being near water, which makes it even more powerful. And water has something which researchers refer to as soft fascination. And nature in general has that also, which is that if you take a walk through the woods, or if you're standing by a lake, a stream, it doesn't have to be the ocean, there's something interesting going on. There's the colors of nature, there's the rippling effect of the water. There's something that keeps your mind interested, but not so overwhelmed that you can't think about other things. And so there's something very calming about it. And our stress hormones actually go down, our levels of cortisol go down, our muscles unclench, our blood pressure goes down. And that's particularly true. Those studies have been done around water and similarly around other spots in nature. And it's almost a magical effect that we should just recognize more and allow to happen. I think so often, so many of us are on our computers talking to each other and sitting in a chair. And, I'm a writer, and when I'm working, and if I'm working on something, I get, my muscles get clenched and I lean harder and harder over my laptop and I say, I'm not getting up until I figure this out. Well, it's the exact opposite of what you should do. Like if you get up, if you take a walk, if you go into nature, if you relax for a little bit, creativity improves, your sense of calm improves. And so I think using that as an outlet and as a tool, the motion, the being in nature is really strong. One other quick thing about being in nature is that there have even been studies that have found that when people take walks in nature versus taking a walk in the city, they do, I think it was 50% better on memory tests. So it's affecting our brains in ways that we can't even begin to imagine.
A perfect, perfect example, and I talk about that so much on the podcast. I absolutely agree. I mean, and I'm like the science nerd, so I completely geek out over things like that. But yes, there is an energetic level of calming. I mean, we're all energy, obviously, but there is an energetic level when you are out, and which is why they call it grounding, right? And you go out into nature and you have grounding, and it's really that calibration of energy. And the same thing happens when you're at the beach. That's been actually scientifically proven also. So absolutely. And I know people think, well, I can't take a vacation and I can't get away. And that's the only way I'm going to be able to have this release of stress, or they go on vacation and they come back and they were like, "Well, I was calm when I was at the beach, but now I'm stressed again." And it's like, "But you can simply go outside."
Right.
It's something so simple and small can be so incredibly
Yeah.
helpful. I'm curious, when you were doing your research for this newest book, was there anything that just surprised you that you just didn't realize before? Like, just like, "Wow, I wish more people knew that. I didn't know that."
Oh, so many things. Um, but I think one of the first pieces of research that got me was when I interviewed a professor named John Barge at Yale. And he's a professor who has been doing fascinating research for many, many decades in this field. And he did a study some years ago where he invited volunteers, which of course are always college students, to come to his lab. And they were met downstairs by one of his associates. And she was holding some papers, and they got into the elevator to go up to his lab. And she would sort of fumble with the papers, and she would ask them to hold her coffee for her. And some of the people she gave a hot cup of coffee to, and some of them she gave an iced cup of coffee to. And they would hold the coffee until they got up to the lab. And then they went on to what they thought was the experiment, where they were asked to evaluate certain people who were described to them. Well, the real subject of the research, which they didn't realize, was that the people who were given the hot cup of coffee described the people as being warmer and kinder than the people who were given the cold cup of coffee. Now, this sounds absolutely nuts. And how could that be? But our brains seem to think in metaphors, and our brains are getting information that they don't always know what to do with. So you're holding something warm, and all of a sudden there's a warmth in your body, and you're introduced to somebody, and you feel a little bit more warmly towards them, or think of them as being a little bit warmer. And this research has been repeated in all sorts of ways. There was a professor at the University of Michigan in the business school who was doing a study on negotiating. And he found that people negotiated harder when they were sitting in hard chairs than when they were sitting in soft chairs. Now, again, what's that about? Well, it may be that if you're sitting in a hard chair, you're getting a message of tension and hardness, and it comes out in how you're negotiating. Soft chair, soft heart. It may be, again, that kind of metaphor. And I just found that so fascinating. And if I may, I'll tell you one more study that was very similar to that. It was done on resumes. Now, resumes are sort of a standard, as you know, psychological test. And if I gave you somebody's resume to evaluate, you would go, oh, she's checking for unconscious bias, and I'm not going to let the person's gender or ethnicity or location make a difference. But what you might not think about would be the weight of the clipboard that was holding the resume. And it turned out that the people whose resumes were on heavy clipboards were judged as being more serious. They were judged as being heavyweights. And the people whose resumes were on light clipboards were seen as less serious. Again, if you asked anybody, did the weight of the resume have anything to do with your evaluation? They would say, of course not. Don't be ridiculous. But our bodies are sending these unconscious messages all the time, just like the hard chair, just like the warm coffee. And I found that stunningly interesting and made me realize that, look, those are not necessarily things that we can use on a daily basis, though I guess you could throw some softer pillows around your house, and if you have friends over, make sure you give them a warm drink as well as a cold drink. But what it said to me was that we need to be more aware of our bodies, and we need to be more aware of the messages that are being sent. So, in a practical way, there were some things that I discovered after that. So, for example, there's a lot of research that shows that if you sit up straighter, or if you stand up straighter, you have more access to happy emotions. You have more access to happiness. And it sort of makes sense because, again, with our constant brain scanning, when you're depressed, you naturally slouch, and your body starts to think of slouching as a sign of depression. So sometimes, if you live in a city as I do and you're walking through quickly, you just kind of get hunched over and you start to feel more and more negative. And I've started to use this as one of my tools when I'm in the city and I'm starting to feel really, overwhelmed by something. I used to sometimes physically make myself stop and think of something positive before you go on. Think of something to be grateful about before you go on. And now I'll actually stop and just stand up a little straighter and I'll look up at the sky. And maybe I'll still try to think of something positive, but it's a lot easier to think of something positive when you do that. And I love the idea that it just gives you one more tool in that happiness toolbox to say, I'm feeling terrible. I know it's silly, but I'm just going to stand up straight and take a deep breath. And it can make a difference.
That is so true. That actually reminds me of when you take confidence classes or you take speaking courses and or something like that, and they always say the power pose, or you stand very straight and erect, and you could put your it's kind of like Superwoman or Superman, and you put your hands on your hips, and they call it the power pose, and it's like that one pose signals to your body that it is powerful and that it is confident, and that is so intriguing actually to me. It's fascinating. And it makes me wonder because it's something you just said was that we need to pay more attention to how our bodies are sending these signals that we might not realize. And so, are there things that we should be aware of, or have you come across anything in your studies where even if we are doing something with good intentions, it could be zapping our joy based on the signals that our bodies are sending?
It's a great question. And yes, I think our bodies can often be sending negative signals. There was another study on smiling that you probably are familiar with because it goes back many years. Now, I had first resented this study because, women have been told to smile far too much. But it turns out that there's not a bad reason for it. This study, which was done by, I believe his name was Fritz Strock many years ago, and it started in Germany, and he had people holding pens in their mouths. And some people were put in a way that their facial muscles were turned into a smile, and some people where they were turned into a frown. And the people whose faces were pushed into a smile found cartoons funnier and were happier than the people whose facial muscles were pushed into a frown. Now, you would like to think that your brain is smart enough to distinguish between being happy and having a pen stuck in your mouth, but it turns out that it's not. There's something called the facial feedback hypothesis, where your brain is checking the facial muscles and determining how to interpret them and how to feel. So it's true that if you smile, you're going to feel a little bit happier. And if you're constantly frowning, you're going to feel a bit more negative, even if you don't think that's how you're feeling. A nice little aside to this is that there's been some research into Botox and finding that Botox, of course, keeps you from frowning. And early research suggests that if you can't frown, you may feel happier because your brain can't be getting the message of unhappiness. So I don't use Botox, but if anybody needs an excuse to use it that has nothing to do with vanity, I've just given you one. It is to
That's actually really fascinating. I haven't really thought about that. That's really fascinating. Huh. That one's making me think a little bit. That
See,
is
you can
really
run out right
fascinating.
now. You don't need it, but some years from now.
I mean, that's just interesting. I almost long for the day that somebody's like, "Well, I got Botox just so I can be
That's
happy
right, absolutely.
because I'm not really."
Well, I actually first came across that research when a young friend who had Botox, and she had had it for a medical reason, and she said she was finding herself much happier and calmer. And she asked her doctor about it, and he said, actually, there is some early research suggesting that it can change emotions. And then I started checking out the research, and as I said, it's still early, but it's very much there.
Wow. Wow. That really is fascinating. Wow. Um, Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about too is because again, you have such an amazing background and career, but you've worked with some of the most recognizable names of our time, like Barbara Streisand and President Obama, for example. And I'm curious, did you find any common themes or anything that you notice in how they approach happiness or purpose when you were working or interviewing them?
I did find that most of the successful people I encountered are optimistic and are positive. And I think one reason for that is that people like to be around optimistic people. And it's not fun to be around somebody who is always finding the negative in things. And so, yeah, I think being positive is a great step to success. And a lot of people see it as the opposite. They feel like, oh, if I'm unhappy, then I'll work harder. And if I just feel grateful and happy about where I am, then I'm not going to take the next step. And back when we did the Gratitude Diaries and we did that national survey, which I mentioned, we found that people are less likely to express gratitude at work than almost any place else. And that's kind of a shame because, we spend more time at work than almost any place else. And I think part of it is, I just said, that fear that I'm grateful, it cuts back on my ambition. And the truth turns out to be the opposite, that grateful people, happy people tend to be much more successful. In that survey, we found that something like 90% of people said that they would work harder for a grateful boss, and that they thought a grateful person was more likely to be successful because nobody succeeds on their own. And if you're grateful and kind to people, they're more likely to be supportive of you.
One of the things that I find, especially in coaching, a lot of people will come and talk about their career and their frustrations, and that is so true. It's a lot of people don't think about gratitude at work. It's just work is always the drag, it's always the drain. But then when you talk about one of the things I always ask is like, what would make it better? What would help a situation? What would make you look forward to work? And it's always about getting acknowledgement from a boss, or it is something along the terms of if my boss just showed some appreciation, or if my coworker showed me some respect. Like it really comes down to essentially exactly what you were just saying. That is, I think that's so important. I think most people realize that only when they're being pushed to really think about their work situation. I always say that is so important with management. So I love that you said that. One of the things I'm wondering is for people who are listening and they feel stuck or they feel disconnected from their body or maybe anxious or overwhelmed, which is a common thing with always having to be on nowadays, always having to be connected in some way. Usually people feel like they're pulled in many different directions, working on many different roles and responsibilities. Where would you encourage them to begin? And I'm saying this on the premise of that on this channel, we do talk a lot about mind body, but it's usually from the form of meditation and breath work. And a lot of times the pushback again is, I don't know how to meditate. I don't know how to quiet my mind. I don't know how to sit in silence. I'm curious, what would you say to someone who feels disconnected or stuck? Where would you encourage them to begin with the mind body
It's a
connection?
great question. I think maybe think back to the things that as a child made you happy. Did you like to run? Did you like to swim? Did you like to dance? Because as I said before, I think movement should be part of joy. And I swam as a kid, and then I stopped swimming for years and years. I didn't want to put on a bathing suit. It was too much trouble and all those other things. And a few years ago, I got over all that and I just started swimming again. And I'm not a great swimmer, but I enjoy it. I like being in the water. And I find that often when I go to a gym and I want to exercise for a half an hour, I am watching the clock and going, we are now at 22 minutes. We are now at 23 minutes. And it's a chore. And when I'm in the water, I just enjoy being there. And when 30 minutes is over, because the place that I go in the winter, I only get to be there for 30 minutes. I go, it's done already. I have to get out. And, because it's a pleasure. It's my enjoyment. So think about what you enjoyed when you were younger. And if there was nothing, then just go out and take a walk. Just go find someplace pretty. You drive 10 minutes from your house. I guarantee you can find a park or a stream or a lake or someplace pretty that you can just take a little walk. And I can almost guarantee that you're going to feel different, that you're just going to feel a sense of relaxation. You're just going to appreciate nature. Don't put in headphones. Don't I hate to say it, but don't listen to this podcast. Listen to it when you get back home. Um, Listen to the birds, look at the trees. Just allow yourself to experience something in real life and in real time. None of us are going to be completely divorced from our screens, and we shouldn't be. And we can learn huge amounts of things from podcasts and YouTube and all sorts of other places. But we also need that time of just experiencing our bodies and experiencing life in real time.
Yeah. Well, Janice, this has been such a beautiful and empowering conversation. So thank you so very much. I think there's so many nuggets for our listeners. But before we close, I wanted to ask you a few rapid fire questions just to let them know more about you, learn more about you. But what is a body based practice that you would swear by?
For me, it's just walking, just moving your body in some way. I am not a person who likes massages. I don't I don't go to spas, which shocks people, but, and some people do enjoy that, but for me, body-based is just enjoying my own body myself.
What is a moment of unexpected happiness that stays with you?
I have moments in places that I think when we think of happiness, we so often put it to a place. And for me, I do travel a lot, and I can think of spots where I have just stood on a mountain and just felt that flood of happiness, or actually, stood in an ancient ruin and had this sense of history just pour over me, and think of our place in the world. And so those moments are very powerful to me as being within a place and feeling my place in them differently. When I was young, I used to love to go to the beach and into the ocean and just look out in the ocean. And my husband and I had a joke about the vastness of the universe, because on one of our first dates, I was standing at the beach and I was looking out and I said, don't you think people just come here because when you stand and look out at the ocean, you feel your small place in the vastness of the universe? And the man who would soon become my husband looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, "No, I think people come here because they like the sand." Uh, but vastness of the universe became our joke ever since, and I do feel that. I like to feel that sense of place in the world and in history.
I am right there with you, by the way. I the same. I love going to the beach because I do feel the vastness of the world, and it's very humbling to think about uh, just really kind of how small we are in such a vast world and how beautiful. It's just beyond our day-to-day perception. It's just a reminder of how big and expansive this world is, and especially even traveling in different cultures. So, I'm right there with you.
I
Absolutely.
love what you
I say the same
say to
exact thing.
me.
If you could leave one important message with our listeners today, what would it be?
I think it's that so many of the things that you think aren't your choices are your choices, and that you do have the power to make your life better. and nobody else does. It's very easy to blame other people or demand things of other people, but really, so much of it comes down to your choice. And to realize that you do have the choice to be happier, and you do have the choice to make other people happier, and to try to see the world and your own experience in it as a better place. And try to do that, and you'll make yourself and others a lot happier.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful because it really is just one small thing a day. Like, that's what I try to tell people, even if it's just holding a door open for someone,
Mhm.
smiling, waving, just the little small decisions that we make, the micro decisions that we make every day could change your entire life if you allow it to. So that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for this insightful and soul nourishing and honest conversation. I know that our listeners are going to walk away feeling empowered and hopefully more connected to themselves. We will be sure to link to both books and your website, but is there anything else you wanted to share with our audience in terms of how to contact you?
Well, I do have a website, which is just janicekaplan.com. And there's a way to contact me there. And I love to hear from people and to hear your tricks for happiness and for gratitude. So please be in touch. And this has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me. And we're going to have to go to the beach sometime, quite
Yes,
clearly.
clearly. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Janice.